And hello, everyone. We are live with you today. Thank you for being here. Good morning. And thank you for saying hi. We're seeing your messages on the chat, and we'll wait for a few minutes to get everybody in. Before we get started, I'm here with Nikki Henderson. Hi, Nikki.
Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are.
So Nikki, you started with Outremer exactly 2 years ago, and that's how you got in touch with the brand. And you were telling me, because I wasn't there at the time, I wasn't with Outremer yet at the time, and then you told me that you started blogging, and that unbeknownst to you, because you were at sea, people seem to be liking what you were writing because you were blogging about your experience, and we liked it too, actually, and that's how we came to start a collaboration and trying to help provide your experience to first to the community of Outremer sailors, and then through a wider audience. And this is what we're doing here with these blue water sailing webinars, is trying to basically share your experiences with a bigger audience. So I'll go quickly because I know that a lot of you guys are following our series, and so you already know what I'm going to say. So I'm going to go quickly over this. But basically, the reason why Grand Large Yachting is doing these webinars is because it's in our DNA to make boats that are made for blue water cruising, actually, whether they're monohulls or multi-hulls. And the group has become a key player in the European yachting industry. And we've got 5 main blue water sailing brands, and I'm sure a lot of you have already heard of these brands, which are Allure. These are in order of entry in the group. So it started with Allure, Outremer, Garcia, Gunboat, and RM, and all these boats are made for blue water sailing. And basically, we have a lot of people who are planning to buy a boat or thinking about a blue water cruising, and they don't really know how to go on with this. And so the idea came up to do these webinars to provide some content. What you see here is that we've already had 3 webinars on different subjects, starting with Pete Goss, who talked about daring to dream about blue water cruising. Christian Dumas, who did a very interesting webinar about the weather routing. And then Louis Kéliès, as I said previously 2 weeks ago, from his boat, live from near Barcelona, to talk about how you manage a boat, technical boat management in blue water cruising. And so we're here today with Nikki, and Nikki chose quite a hot topic, which we entitled, Can There Be More Than One Skipper on Board? And we'll dive right into this. And then in 2 weeks from now, we'll have Martin Houdet, who's an urgentist, to talk about medicines. I mean, the basics, obviously, of medicines on board while blue water sailing. And then we'll finish with Knut Frostadt, who some of you might have heard of, obviously, Sailing Digital, a Freedom Factor on board. So, since I've already introduced you, Nikki, I think we'll be moving on to your side of the presentation. And again, for anybody who did not hear this message earlier on, we welcome any questions you may have on the slides that are on screen. I'll take them in my own voice so we can have a more dynamic discussion. If your questions are more generic, then we'll have a Q&A towards the end where you can ask anything you'd like to Nikki, and we'll be glad to answer. So with that, Nikki, I'm turning it on to you.
Thank you, Corinne, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Good evening, perhaps, if you're in Australia. Thank you for joining. So just before I begin, I thought I'd let you know where you stand, so you can work out how long to stick around for. I'll do a quick introduction of myself for anyone who doesn't know who I am. Then I'm just going to give you some background on the topic, I suppose, where I came to this idea of this webinar, and what the situation currently is or was when I was growing up in terms of skippering. Then I'm going to pose the question, why would you want more than one skipper, and do that through some scenarios. So breaking down some scenarios that I've been in to suggest why why it would be a good idea to have more than one skipper. I've already given away my argument. And then some practical tips for you guys to take away that you could maybe try, because it's very easy for me to say that it works, but doing it is another thing altogether. So as Karine said, do ask questions in the chat, and before I click to next slide, I will we'll try and make sure we answer them if they're relevant at the time. So who am I? Without going into my life story, I suppose what's relevant to this question and this topic is that I suppose I'm an underdog in sailing. So if you had looked at me at 18 years old when I started my career and suggested that, you know, 10 years later, which is where I am now, that I would have done what I was going to do, honestly, no one would have believed me. I didn't really grow up sailing. I was a woman, which was unusual in the industry, a lot more unusual than it is now even. I wasn't really sort of hugely into science. I didn't study sort of physics at a higher level. I wasn't fascinated by how wings work. I didn't actually get involved in much water sports, apart from very, very loose sort of connections, a bit of kayaking here and there, a bit of sailing, a bit of windsurfing, but really just sort of playing as a child in kids camps and that sort of thing. So yeah, so it wasn't really an obvious route, but I decided to take it, and I think I had one of my kind of, you know, life, people say life has these key moments, and I decided to walk away from one path in my life and towards sailing. And why did I do that? Because I think at the time I was 18 and I did one trip because it was just a cool way. It was a cool idea. A friend of mine had it to travel. I did it and I realized how much I was learning about myself. And at 18 years old, that's quite a cool thing to learn about yourself and to discover, you know, how you think and how you behave in stressful situations, and also then how you fit into a wider group of people and into a team. And sailing is very revealing for that. And I quickly pursued that in a quite a serious sense, as I would do with that kind of thing, and very quickly realized that I wanted to share it. And, you know, sailing is incredible in so many ways, and we always talk about the amazing things we see, you know, the sunsets, the sunrises, the dolphins, you know, I just came back actually yesterday from I just sailed from the UK to Lanzarote, and, you know, the sights looking out of the boat and onto the water are enough to, you know, bring, as we experienced in the last 2 weeks, you know, grown men to tears. It's a very reflective place. But I think what really, really pulled me in was when I started looking into the boat and looking at how humans and people interacted with each other, and watching sort of their, and it's a bit cliche to say, but their journey in a more metaphorical sense, their inner journey, because sailing really, especially blue water sailing, really has, I don't know, a power to open someone up, sort of unpeel the layers that we hide behind on land. Take off the makeup, take off the clothes, take off the labels, chuck yourself in a pair of foulies, everyone looks the same, don't shower for a few days. I mean, those are the physical things, but with that and that separation from land comes this other experience. And I think whether it happens in a very small sense or a large sense, it happens to everyone every time they go to sea, which is you remind yourself of who you are down to your core, I think, and more extreme situations tend to produce more extreme results, and you learn bigger things. Yeah, so that's me. So you can read the list of accolades, but I used female sailing and teaching women how to sail as a sort of gateway into the industry. I must have taught hundreds of women how to sail, blue water sailing, RYA courses, racing in sort of the space of 3 or 4 years, which naturally led me to skipper a clipper race. And if you look at my career, in some ways this topic makes sense because I'm talking all about leadership and that's what I'm really interested in. But in other ways it doesn't, because I'm suggesting there should be more than one skipper on a boat, and my entire career has been has basically been dominated by situations where I am the instructor and everyone else doesn't really know very much about sailing. So it's hopefully I can connect with you guys in some level, whether it's my upbringing or my experience now or my dreams about where I want to take sailing, and that can pin you in, and I can persuade you along my thinking in the next probably about half an hour. So let's look back at where sailing comes from. So traditionally, I think we all kind of, if you say to someone, even if you say to a child now, you know, think of a sailor, they're probably going to imagine, you know, Captain Birdseye type figure, captain's hat, because you always need a hat to show that you're in charge, right? They might have a white beard because they need to be older and weather beaten. Probably a man, because traditionally there were no women at sea. You know, when I was growing up, the image of Popeye was always one, so big muscles, eating spinach, saying "arr." And in terms of how you would traditionally lead a boat, it was very, I guess, top down, or this triangle shape. So one person, sort of the admiral in charge. You know, if you talk about Nelson and HMS Victory, you never talk about, you know, probably the 100 people below him that were all helping him do his job. We just talk about Nelson. So yeah, there was a lot of emphasis put on the person in charge. And I think literally, I'm not a historian, but I think that top-down triangle also is directly relative to where the crew would sleep and live on the boat, and where they would stand, the pedestals they needed for their authority. And of course, the carrot and stick approach, which we have only just really, even in the business world, I think, started to walk away from, which is, well, back in the day, probably that you wouldn't live very long if you decided to break the rules or not work very hard. So I'm probably sure you're guessing by now that I am not so into that, that model. And that's what this talk is all about. So while we're talking about the kind of traditional hierarchy on a boat, I think you guys hopefully have got a phone or a piece of paper, and I'm just interested to hear. So captain, mate, and crew is the 3 roles I've written down there. But maybe take, let's say, 30 seconds and scribble down as many roles as you can think of on a boat. So how many areas of responsibility on a boat that is blue water sailing can you think of? And I'll give you 30 seconds.
And Nikki, if you can hear me, just so you know, on our poll, so I've just asked an easy question to start with, and among the respondents, maybe not everybody answered, but you've got 80% who are men sailors and only 20% women sailors. So I'm really happy that that our men sailors are interested in this topic as well. And so we'll hear what they have to say, and you can give us your answers in the chat, and I can read them out loud.
Yeah, thank you for all coming, by the way. And I'd say 80-20 in comparison to some areas of the industry is pretty good. But I'm sure after this talk, it will spread. So hopefully in a week's time, everyone will have encouraged their female friends to join in as well. But this is aimed for both men and women, just to clarify. So hopefully you thought of them. Here's what I thought of. So there's absolutely tons, and my spider diagram or my map got a bit small, so I had to stop. But what I'm trying to highlight is a boat is like a small business. There's a multitude of different areas of responsibility and different skills that are needed for those roles. I've sort of stereotypically highlighted the pink roles as we would traditionally have thought of the female roles on a boat, if you were to imagine a male and female dynamic. And I think it's really, really important that we don't shy away from the difficult topic of, the pink and the blue jobs, or the male and the female. I think, for us to move forward with this idea of balancing out gender, first we have to look at what the situation is now and not sort of sugarcoat it. So the reality, what I see when I look at that, is that there are tons of jobs. It's not a small thing. B, that there is definitely an imbalance of roles. So let's forget what the roles are, but physically, how many roles are there on that map? If that is how your boat, your team, your family, your couple, if that's how you guys operate, I think you probably, just looking at that, might want to balance out some of these things so that you have at least an equal responsibility, because that's a lot of weight on one person. And of course, some of these jobs are slightly heavier than others. So provisioning for a 4-week crossing or 3-week and a week reserve is probably going to take you quite a lot longer than, let's have a look, let's say, planning the strategy for day one. But they do tend to level out. And having run a team on the Clipper race, which is a very big team, so each leg had about 20 people on. Everyone was extremely busy, both in port and at sea. So there's definitely enough to entertain everyone. And I would really encourage you to consider whether you split those up into even more people. So not just sort of in this scenario, I guess I'm imagining a male and a female couple, or a male-male couple, or a female-female couple. But if you have a family as well, there's no reason why, a child over the age of 12 couldn't help you, manage water consumption, or whether, a child, especially if they're into Lego or Meccano, couldn't sort of start unpacking a bilge pump if it broke, and having, or a toilet pump, and having a look at how the seals all fit together. So yes, dividing up the roles. So
yeah. Nikki, we've had some comments that indeed, I mean, because there are so many roles, the slide is not that easy to read. Maybe you want to touch on some additional aspects that are in these bubbles that you haven't talked about.
So I can read those through. So I suppose under the one half of the roles is which is coloured in pink. I've got cleaning, cooking, provisioning, which all sort of go under a very stereotypical umbrella. I've got land communication. So when you're on shore, making sure that the rest of the team or the crew is knowing what's going on. I've got medic, so someone who's in charge both of medical scenarios at sea, but also of collecting medical information from people, next of kin documentation, doctor, hard line to someone's doctor if they have any conditions, and then also provisioning the boat with medical supplies. So working out from the crew that you've got and the passage you're doing, what medical equipment do you need? I've also got, that's good. If you can't read it, then I definitely can't. I can't work out what that last. Oh, social secretary. So that's both at sea and on shore. You would be, I'm always amazed how much effort it actually takes to organise, meals in the evenings before you're going, how to make sure the crew bond on shore before you leave. And then at sea, a huge emphasis should be placed on, making sure that the crew are gathering and having a good time. And so, that's anything from activities each day to making sure everyone gathers together. This is sort of a whole lecture in itself, so I'm sort of flying through it, but it should give you some ideas, and we can go into those in more detail another time. And then on the other side, you've got satellite communications, making sure they're working, fuel and water management, that would be at sea, but also on shore, making sure that you've got enough gas, fuel, water, emergency water, water filters if you've got a water maker, line handling, so, you know, who's in charge of looking after the lines, and also, you know, in a maneuver, who's going to be the one pulling the things. You've got driving the boat, weather routing, navigating, strategy and tactics. They all sort of go together. Engineering, both electrical and mechanical. You've got plumbing, everyone's favorite. I'm sure you've all got a plumbing story you can share. Carpentry and boat building. So those are sort of exterior and interior boat building issues. So a little dent in the fiberglass or the gel coat. And also, you know, everything from door cabinet handles falling off and dinks in the varnish. So hopefully that makes that a bit clearer as to where I started to think about how I would have to sort of split out those responsibilities.
Yes, thank you, Nikki.
So if it works, why change it? So a lot of people will say to me, well, it's worked for us for 10 years, or it's all working fine. So why do we move forward with this? And I think I can only say that from my position as an instructor in an often very confidential environment, perhaps you just have to take my word for it that it isn't working. It's not working for everybody. And I imagine if you're here, you're probably thinking it's not quite working. I think that we are sort of pioneers of blue water sailing. I feel like one. I just spent 4 weeks working with some really great friends that also are feel that sense of responsibility to make sure that blue water sailing is something that continues to grow, and we share it and we make it more popular. And I suppose, how do we do that? We need to always work to make it more safe, more fun, and we need to make it more safe and more fun and grow it for the long term. And I think that's really, if you're going to sort of put an emphasis on anything I say in the next 15, 20 minutes, it would be that I'm thinking long term. So you can normally get away with anything you like for a year or two. But if you're looking at cruising or blue water sailing for the next 5, 8, 10, 15 years, you guys might want to think about how to implement some good habits now. So here is just, I just popped this in. This is a sort of, you could Google this. This is an idea of collaborative or consensus-based thinking. So let's take that triangle, level it into like a rectangle, take all those roles, and you can do this after the webinar, take all those roles and even them out amongst all your crew and make them level, make the responsibilities even, and everyone has their own area. And it doesn't mean that everyone doesn't do every area, but everyone would have responsibility for that area that it's done. And then I believe, and when I am sort of my best version of myself when I'm skippering, and I've had sleep and food and the rest of the necessities, the consensus-based decision-making, which is to discuss the problem, to kind of take everyone's opinions into an account and make kind of a rough plan, an outline. Once you've got that outline, if you spell it out, people who were left behind in that discussion can then come in and you know, sort of play a devil's advocate or ask questions, and then perhaps you modify it and then you end up with a plan. And I think that while you're looking at this, again, take this away, use it if you like. I can prove to you that it works over a beer or at sea. But remember that this doesn't have to be a process that takes 2 hours. This can be a process, if well led, that is 30 seconds. It can be, right, we're going to do this. Who, you know, what do you think? What do you think? What do you think? Chuck it all in. You know, any questions? You know, in an emergency situation is what I'm sort of referring to. You can still do this. And I just did a safety briefing a week ago, and we were talking about emergencies. And I said to the guys, and we were talking about, I think, evacuating ship or a fire, fire that leads to evacuating ship. I said, it doesn't matter how big the fire is or how imminent the evacuating ship is. If you gather in a muster point for 20 to 30 seconds and make a plan and come together as a team, the difference in what you ultimately will achieve is so huge. You know, you take chaos and you make it perhaps organized chaos, but it's really, really, really valuable just to take that second. And I learned that from two skippers, a Dutch couple I sailed with right at the beginning of my career, telling me a story about when their rudder fell off. And they said, I said, oh, what did you do? You know, they were in a gale in the North Atlantic, and they said, oh, we just had a cup of tea. And have a cup of tea and have a think is normally a very good solution. And I am British, so I would say that. So this is my idea. I think you kind of got the idea. My idea is to make, how do we make sailing long-lasting, blue water sailing, a long-lasting, fun and safe adventure? I think if you implement collaborative and consensus-based leadership, so you level out the playing field, you divide up responsibilities, I think we will in 10 years' time be asking ourselves, why on earth did we ever think that one person could do all 25 different things simultaneously on a boat while the other one read their book on the foredeck? I just don't think that will ever, that is a very good ingredient to lasting blue water sailing. And now we're going to go through some scenarios and discuss them. These are common scenarios in which people would argue that there shouldn't be more than one skipper. And just, we can discuss them. I will discuss them to myself. But if you have any comments, put them in as I'm talking. And I'm happy to kind of, I like to be challenged, and we can see if there's, you know, two ways to look at them. But yeah, this is what I'm trying to do. So I'm not trying to kick everyone off their pedestal, but more make it better for everyone. So before we go any further, hopefully you still have your piece of paper. I'd like you to write down one sentence that explains why you didn't take the lead on a boat in a scenario when there was an opening for it. So why did you not step up into a position of responsibility? I'll give you another 30 seconds.
So while you guys are writing these down, I'm going to read some of the comments. Graham says, I totally agree. We have tried to run our boat like this for a few years, but it's not always easy. So Graham, maybe you can tell us some situations where it wasn't easy. Alexandru says, Nikki, for my wife and I, the future is now, according to that slide. And Timothy is answering to our poll. I have a poll running to see what roles people have on their boats. And Timothy says, you should add another all of the above, because right now we have about 80% who say they're the captain most of the time when they're sailing, and they're responsible for all key decisions. I did say key decisions. 12% consider they're seconds. They can make decisions when needed. And we only have 5% who are just crew members. They do what they're told, and none are passengers. Even though I said you could say passengers if you just enjoy the ride, but I guess everybody here is actually quite active on their boats. So that's
really cool.
Yeah, just to give us some
feedback. And most people who go blue water sailing do have some interest in stepping up. Okay, so we're going to roll through, because I know that some of you guys probably have to jet it at the 1 hour mark, so I'm going to keep moving forward. So scenario A, So this is a quote I hear a lot. So they've been sailing for, 20 years, your partner, your team member. So they are always going to be better. Now, I suppose myself, I am a walking example that is not necessarily the case. But I started along this idea of quality, not quantity, I suppose, in terms of experience when I about 2 years into my career. Anyone who's heard me speak before hears me quote a woman who said to me, "Oh, you're going to go far because you don't have the skills yet, but you have the attitude." And I think that that is the case for anyone in sailing. Sailing is this beautiful kind of join between an artistic person and a scientist. So depending on where you lie in that scale, you will find your place on a boat. It's not a black or a white scenario. It's a grey one. And I think if you go back to that list of the roles, the most amazing thing about sailing is there is a role for everyone. And I just put this picture up here of a crew I did the Fastnet with back in 2019. They were it was an organization in Malta, and they try to get sort of young children into sailing because they believe it really helps them go sailing, but also develop other life skills, like all those things we just put in that circle. And I think that, for example, on that, they had one of the youngest skippers in the fleet, myself, and then there were seven or eight of them, and they were all under the age of 20, most of them under the age of 18, never had done an offshore race in their life. Some of them came through the program and learned sailing through the charity, and others grew up sailing. And together we actually managed to come first out of 18 J109. So we sort of won our one design fleet. And I think, and they didn't even know what they were going into. And the reason it worked is because of the division of responsibility within the team, because one person can never do everything. And because we had these clear roles that matched their skill set, irrespective of sailing. So, someone's not seasick, so they're going to be great down below, or someone really wants to study mechanical engineering at university, so they're going to manage all the systems in the water. That sort of thing, seeping out people's other skills and seeing how we can apply those to the team means that experience and years, I suppose, years of experience is not relative to how well you do. So that is scenario A. Scenario B, comfort zone, is I have no interest in pushing my comfort zone. I'm perfectly happy where I am. This is a really common one. It's a really common one you hear from couples. So they've done it a certain way all the time. So one of them's a great cook, and the other's a great engineer. So why on earth would they swap? It works. It's worked for 50 years. They both love their roles. They define who they are. Their friends love them. It makes a great dinner party, and it also makes a good sailing trip. So why change that? And I think it makes me think of this woman. I did on the Clipper race. I had a woman join me, and I think it would be quite funny if she's listening right now. But she joined in Australia, in Western Australia, in Fremantle, and we sailed from Fremantle to Sydney. We did the Sydney Hobart. We sailed from Hobart up to Airlie Beach in the Great Barrier Reef. Then we sailed from Airlie Beach, the Great Barrier Reef, to Sanya, an island in China, and from Sanya up to Qingdao. So she was there for 3 months. And when she came in Australia, she looked me in the eye and she said, "You know what, Nikki, I do not know why I am here." She said, "My husband signed me up. I have no interest in this. I do not care about sailing. I don't need to push myself. I just don't. I'm going to hate every second," which was I considered to be a personal challenge. And seeing her journey, again, sorry to use that cliche term, but seeing her progression, I suppose, of slowly breaking down this exterior of happy in her comfort zone, and then her realizing that irrespective of how happy she was in her comfort zone, there was times at sea where she had to come out of her comfort zone, whether she liked it or not. And then seeing her, and I think this is the key, is that when she was forced out of her comfort zone, her then realizing, because she didn't want to go out of her comfort zone, but then realizing what that does for you, and in a safe and safe mentally as well as physically safe environment, she was able to see the incredible bits of stepping out of her comfort zone, which are how empowering it is, and how you can really wipe clean this idea of yourself and look in the mirror at someone slightly different, or with slightly different eyes. And I wouldn't say, if you met her now, that she was a dramatically different person, but it does build this level of confidence in you. And I think that is an incredible thing. And I've seen it with the women. I sailed across the Atlantic with 3 crews of 9 women, of which basically none of them had any sailing experience. And I saw that every single time. I'm addicted to it. I'm addicted to seeing people just inch out their comfort zone. So all I can say here is to try it, because then you will see something you've never seen before out of yourself. And I'll give you some ideas at the end as to how to do that. So then there is the power struggle. This is very common from both sides. Whenever I try to take the lead, they just take over. It's such a battle, I don't see the point in trying anymore. So, and this, I would say, goes both directions. So let's take a stereotypical couple. Let's say one of them is in charge of the sailing and one of them is in charge of the galley. This is very typical, sort of two-way kind of grating on a boat, as it is in the household, I think, as well. And I'm not here to be a marriage counsellor, but what happens is you start along this path. So you divide the roles and you divide them very categorically through the middle. So one group of people, one side of the coin does the sort of like stereotypical blue jobs, and the other side does the stereotypical pink jobs. And it's not necessarily the man and the woman, but the cooking and the cleaning versus the sailing and the engineering. And then you go along you take 1 year, 2 years, it's all working fine. And then you have a really long crossing, or you get tired because you've been blue water sailing for years, and you start to kind of get, I suppose, a little bored of your job, a little jaded of your role. And the more and more jaded and the more tired you get, the worse you become at delegating and involving people. So instead of course you can, I ask whoever is in charge of the galley, hey, do you mind if I make lunch today? And they say, instead of saying, yeah, of course, go for it, it's your boat as well as mine, they say, sure. And then every time I take a knife out, they say, oh, what are you doing that for? I'm definitely a culprit of all of these things. I really learnt during the Clipper race, which was the most extreme version of tiredness I've ever felt, that I went into that race, and stood in front of my crew and promised them that I would be that collaborative leader every single time, that I would involve people in decisions, and I would create a very communicative, level, open, inclusive environment. But as the races went on, 8 months, 9 months, 10 months, 11 months, and I was tired, and the responsibility started to crush me a little bit. The responsibility of being the only skipper on the boat. And the more and more tired I got, the snappier I got, the more controlling I felt, the less forgiving I felt. And it's like this downward spiral. You know, once you take on too much responsibility with no way out, you then end up getting increasingly tired. And then the more increasingly tired you get, the less patience you have. So the more controlling you become, and the more perfectionist you are. And the more perfectionist and the more controlling you are, the more tired you are, because you have even more responsibility because you're taking over everything. And it gets worse and worse and worse. So it's not an easy one to break. It's an easy one to begin with. A new habit is easy to set. Again, I'll give you some ideas of how you can do it both from the beginning and also changing it up. But it's one that I would really encourage you to take, and that is to share responsibility. And remember that responsibility is not you take this pot, I take that pot. That never changes. It's also, we could swap pots, or we could take bits of each other's pots, or actually one person could take all of it for one trip because you're feeling off. So yeah, just remember that the more responsibility, the more tired you get, the worse version of yourself you are in general. So the next one, ultimately one person has to call the shots. So this is a very typical response, maybe more from people higher up in the industry in sort of a professional world. People really believe that sailing is an environment where they say sort of like, yeah, I really, really try to be, you know, collaborative, and I like discussions, but, you know, in an emergency situation, like there's got to only be one boss. And I think, yeah, in a way there has only got to be one boss, but that is assuming that all emergency scenarios are one-dimensional. I take myself back to a man overboard. I had a man overboard in the North Atlantic. I was sailing from New York to Ireland with my team in the Clipper race, and about halfway across, we're in the Gulf Stream, so it's really, really bouncy. We're sort of being taken east in about 4 knots of current, and we've got a sort of a 60-degree wind angle. So we've got a boat leaning over, and we're going at 15, 16 knots, and we're absolutely screaming along. And someone falls overboard at the very, very, very front of the boat, and I'm at the very, very, very back of the boat. And in that scenario, you have very little time to get that person out of the water before they start drowning, because they're being dragged under the boat underwater, and the speed of which they're going means that to pull themselves out of the water is extremely difficult. So in that moment, several different things have to happen to make that person, to get that person back on the boat. And it is not a scenario where you could have one person in charge. Because if I had been in charge and we'd had a culture of that triangle, then everyone would have looked back, not forward where they were, where the person was. They would have looked back and wait for direction. I had a communication issue because I was 70 feet away, so there's no way I could have talked to the bow. I didn't really know what was going on at the front of the boat because I was at the back. And the time it would have taken for me to tell all the people to do what they eventually had ended up doing would have taken well over a minute, and he possibly could have died. And those things were crash tack the boat, pull in the main sheet, prepare the medical kit down below, start a log, press the MOB button, throw out the damn buoy, create a communication chain of command, try and get them out of the water, grab a halyard ready to lift them up, get 2 people on halyards ready to grind it back in the cockpit, call a mayday, get on the communication channel. There was like 16 different, completely different roles that all had to happen simultaneously in that environment. And of course, in your situation, you are not going to have, you're not on a racing boat. You don't have 16 crews, so you're going to work out solutions of how to do this with less people. What I'm saying is that the idea of having one person in charge in an emergency situation is actually ludicrous. And that's exactly the kind of situation that people who say, well, you can't have more than one person in charge are referring to. So there's something to think about. The logical dilemma. So we have two more. So the logical dilemma is that they are more experienced than me. It makes no sense for me to take charge. Actually, a friend of mine just quoted a quote. I can't remember who it's by. And it's a quote that defines experience. It says, experience refers to someone who's gotten away with doing the wrong thing more frequently than you. Experience is, again, as I said in the first slide, it's about quality, not quantity. And I think this is the obvious one that most people talk about. They talk about, oh, you know, if you're a couple and one of you falls in the water, well, of course you're going to have to take charge. But the problem with that exact scenario, which is the obvious one that people say, you know, when you're forced to take charge because whoever the skipper is down. The problem with the scenario of, oh, they just fall overboard, is that it's normally followed with, well, let's just not fall overboard. You do have quite a lot of control over not falling overboard. So there are other scenarios in which you might have to take charge, even though you never take charge, such as an injury, an illness. We've learned this last 2 years that even something that we once would have thought was similar to a cold or a flu could take you down for weeks, if not months. There's gear failure that leads to injury. There's emotional breakdowns. This is one that we never talk about, but you know, having been in a position where I was in charge and really struggled at times, there were scenarios where actually, you know, head in hands, tears sort of silently coming out, I said to myself, I just can't do this. I just can't do this. And left a vacuum of authority for a short amount of time because I couldn't be in charge. So there are scenarios, as we all know, where you need to be in charge, even if you're not normally in charge. And all I can say with this is that having been a skipper when I was 20 years old for the first time, I now know, 8 years later, that practicing is a very useful thing, because I can say that I'm a lot better at skipper now than I was then. The more you practice in a real environment, the better it's going to be, and the less afraid you will be of it happening, and the less afraid you are, the more fun you will have, and the safer you will be. And finally, sailing is a physical sport. So this is often what sort of something that women say to me. You know, I'd love to be in the lead, but at the end of the day, you know, if there's something wrong with the mainsail, I'm never going to be able to take it down myself, for example. And all I say is wrong boat, wrong strategy, and it's a brains, not brawn sport. I just recently had a scenario where we were reefing on a boat, and I was trying to teach people how to reef, and we couldn't get the kringle, the metal ring, onto the hook by the gooseneck to sort of hold in the tack of the new reefing point. And all the men could put it on, and all the women, I had 3 men and 3 women, and all the women couldn't. And they said, oh, that's just a thing that they're going to have to do. And, you know, with a simple kind of a block and a tackle, tied a rope on it, set up a ring, they could pull then the reefing line on more quickly than the men could physically, you know, battle it on. And so you guys, I would just recommend you all walk around your boats, or pop a few things in your suitcase before you go, that mean that the boat is sailable, irrespective of your strength, your height, your build. There are things you can do, and there are consultants or people you can speak to help you do that, because physicality should not be a hindrance, as you can ask the 5'2", 16-year-old I sail with on the Fastnet, as well as the 70-year-old I sailed around the world with on the Clipper race. So some ideas for things you guys can do, things you can take away, some sort of tools for your toolbox. And we've only got a couple minutes, so I'll just try and roll through these. So first of all, unlearn old habits. The first stage to doing this for most of you, irrespective of whether you are already sailing or not, is to unlearn how you do it. that means unlearn how you do things at sea, but possibly also unlearn how you do things at home, or unlearn how you interact with each other. And this is for you personally to work out. I'm no counselor nor therapist, but I do know that you need to sit down, be honest with each other, work out the sources of the issues or habits. And one of the biggest, most difficult things is to learn how to follow. It's easier to step up into a position of leadership than it is to step down from a position of leadership. So to do that takes a lot of time and work and communication, but it is doable. So that's one thing. The second thing, find a facilitator. So unlearning old habits is very difficult. But if you bring someone into the environment, into the sailing boat that can help you, and this can be an instructor. And the good thing about an instructor is that they are trained to teach. So if you're learning how to be a leader, they can break things down for you and make it feel less intimidating. It also means that one of you doesn't feel the need to teach the other, which is, having learnt to snowboard from my boyfriend, can tell you that this is not the easiest scenario. The instructor's a good one, but if you don't want to pay for an instructor, and you do get what you pay for there, a friend or a colleague or someone who has a neutral playing field within your relationship with whoever you're sailing with, or multiple people, can also come in and sort of keep you in check. So make sure you can tell them, hey, we all want to do this. We want to divide up responsibilities more equally, and we want you to make sure that we do that. So every time you step in and take over, they pull you aside and they say, no, it's not your time. Or every time everyone's waiting for someone to take charge and you're meant to be in charge, they're going to give you a little shove up the backside. And if you really don't like sailing with other people, you can also try and do this yourself. And there are some ways you can do that. So you can create yourself. And again, it's going to feel a little bit like you're at school or in a business meeting, which I realize is not why you want to go sailing. You probably want to escape the office. But if you put together some sort of debrief lists to sort of keep you on track, to work out your aims, what you want to try and do with this division of responsibility, and then perhaps sit down each day over a sundowner and just check that you're still on track. And yes, I did say sundowner. I don't mind a one beer before sunset sometimes. Logistics. So one of the most difficult things I find when I'm trying to help other people step up into leadership is that if they don't feel like they deserve the leadership, they don't feel like they're the best, they feel it's a bit silly. So they feel like it's all just a bit of a show. You know, you say, oh, I want more responsibility. So someone says, oh, well, you can cook today. You know, it feels a bit embarrassing almost. So if you create sort of a very clear and strict schedule, that can help things. So I've put in a few ideas here. If you're in a catamaran, you know, if you want to get into engineering, have the ownership of one engine. And over time, even though you don't like engineering, you'll at least start to see some feedback, because you'll see, you know, your engine's better than theirs. You know, you may not be into engineering, but you like a start to finish a project, or you like details, or you like, or you're competitive. You know, therefore this might work for you. Week on, week off is quite nice. That's really, really nice. I would really like that. A break from responsibility for a week sounds great. And if you outline it before you go, you can prepare yourself mentally for your roles. So if I prepare myself mentally to not be in charge, I can be really relaxed. I'll take all the social activity on shore because I know I don't have to worry about all these other things. And the other person, and you know the other person has it covered. Again, alternate roles. So even change up roles weekly too. So perhaps you split your roles into several groups and you completely swap over the roles. And then play the long game is what I'm saying here is remember that however uncomfortable this feels and unnatural, you're setting up habits for the long term. So in 5 years' time, this is not going to feel unnatural. This is going to feel like the best way to run your boat. And then finally, make it positive. This is not going to be a smooth road. And you're going to come up with hurdles. You're going to find you're going to have to learn a lot in some areas. And especially if you start unpicking your inner relationship with the person you're sailing with, this is going to be also a little bit weird and different. So at sea, to kind of keep people sane, especially if I'm on 3, 4, 5 week passages, especially if we encounter wind holes and that sort of thing, and it's a slow crossing, you know, celebrating the small wins and really, really congratulating them just helps them feel good. You know, at the end of the day, we're like big children. And when you bring up children, not that I have my own, but so I hear, when you bring up children, the more positive feedback you give them, the more high fives you give them, the better they feel and the more they're inspired to do more. And we all need that, even if we are grown-ups. We need that, hey, you did great today. And, you know, I really respect you sort of communication, and you need it regularly. You don't just need it every now and again because you look a bit low. You need it when you're feeling good too. So yes, so to summarize, unlearn your old habits, find someone to help you do that, put in some new sort of more operational logistics into making that a reality for you and your boat, and then keep it positive. Remember why you're doing it. And if you look to the left of that screen, the words thrive, not survive are there. So you can have an okay crossing, you can have a safe crossing, you can have quite a good time. You can do that for many, many years, blue water sailing, and it will be good. It will be nice. But the difference between a good blue water sailing experience and an exceptional one is absolutely huge. And this sort of smaller dynamics is how you put, I suppose, the sparkle onto your blue water sailing. Rather than the starting point. So think long term, good luck with everything. And I think we are in time for some questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Nikki. That was quite interesting. And now we'll take your questions. If you guys want to have some more questions to ask Nikki. So just to let you know, I ran another poll to see what scenario our audience related to the most. So not surprisingly, the issue of experience is one that comes back as maybe I'll put my camera back on. Yeah, over 50% said that experience, the issue about, you know, they're better than me comes up, and they related to that. Comfort zone came second, with about 20% of people said that they don't really want to push themselves out of the comfort zone. And actually, I had another poll asking our viewers if they felt like they would try and step out of their comfort zone in their relationships while sailing, obviously, because I think that when you sail, you're oftentimes outside of your comfort zone with the sea. But so the answers were, in vast majority, yes, definitely they want to try, and that's why they're here, 73%. 25% said maybe they would try, but they were waiting to hear the end of your presentation. And I'm assuming it's one very courageous person who said, it's not likely, but I'll think about it. But that was good. That was a courageous answer. So let's see if we have questions. The chat is still open, and you can ask Nikki if you have any precisions you'd like. You can also follow her on her Instagram. We've put the link here, and if questions come to your mind later on after this presentation, or if you want to watch the replay and think about it, you can also send us an email at events@gleyachting.com, and we'll forward them happily to Nikki, who will answer. So for now, I don't see any other questions. Let me take a minute to remind you that we'll have another webinar in 2 weeks from now on the topic of medicines on board. Obviously, it's going to be the basics of medicines, because a lot of things that we do when we have people in the room we can't do over the web. But nevertheless, we hope you'll get some good insights into that topic. That's in 2 weeks. Let's see if we have questions. No, still not. And I'm really sorry again. I know some people wondered why we didn't test the webinar, but we did test the webinar and everything was working great. And so when you're live, sometimes things happen. And as Nikki pointed out, yeah, you have to be right. You have to be flexible and share the roles and responsibilities, and that's what we tried to do. Question, Nikki, have you thought about working towards replacing Alex Thompson? That's from Arvid.
I quite like it.
I think
that. you probably got the impression that I quite like sailing with other people. So you have to really need to do some serious inter-reflection if I wanted to do that, I think.
Yeah. And then you have a question from Graham, who would like to know if you could say a little bit more about working with an instructor to help us work better as two skippers.
Yes, I think so. Find the right instructor would be the first one. And there are some really easy ways to do that. There are some Facebook groups, but you can also ask the company. You know, if you contact Outremer, I'm sure they could point you in the direction of some good instructors. And then I would say just be clear with what you want. So if you want to learn how to both take charge, perhaps stage one would be to get a trained professional, so an instructor, to come on board and perhaps just go out for 1 or 2 days as a diagnosis sort of sail to work out where they think or gaps in your experience lie and how you can overcome them, and then start on that journey. If you're both already feel experienced enough to, well, just to go back to that, because often what will happen is people, especially the lesser experienced of the couple, will not realize how good they are. Because if you're always the worst on the boat, say you're with 2 people and you're always the worst, you don't really have any realization of how much you know until someone even worse comes on than you, or not as good, I should say. And you start teaching them, because and then that's sort of like a mirror, it suddenly shows you how much you learn. So get someone on board to identify the gaps, if there are any. And then ideally, if you build on those experiences, get someone back on board again to, I suppose, be the skipper, but be the facilitating skipper. So be the skipper who, if it all went to pot, you know you've got that backup of someone there. But otherwise, you and your significant other on the boat are at a level sort of number 2 position within the team, without that power dynamic between you. And that should hopefully open up some opportunities for you guys to feel more natural about taking charge.
Thank you, Nikki. We have a tricky question. What was the biggest leadership conflict you had with Riley during the Atlantic crossing on La Vagabonde? I don't know if if you might have an answer for that, or.
I don't think conflict, but there was. There's always a interesting tension when you have personal relationships on board. So, of course, I would have considered everyone on that boat really sort of equal in terms of importance. But of course, if your child is there, you feel, at least, and I think you do have a higher level of worry and stress about them. And so sort of managing that at times is hard. And remember, it wasn't just Riley with his child or their child, but also Greta and her father. So there was a lot of family dynamics on board.
Right. Tom asks if he wants to learn more about the engine, where should he start? I don't know if you have an answer for that.
there's a really, really good course. You don't have to have any prerequisite knowledge or understanding of engines to do it. I really recommend the course. It's called the AEC, Advanced Engineering Course, I think. It's run by the NCA, so the UK maritime body. And I think it's 4 days. And in that course, you take apart a diesel engine piece by piece. And then you also do the same with normally a jet ski engine, but just a small petrol engine, injection engine, and then you put it back together again. And I'm not like a really experienced engineer, but I thought that was really cool because it really got you to understand the basic principle of engineering and like find out and see all those weird bits on the engine, which when you're in a boat, you can't even see because it's like under the bed, under the bunk, under the bulkhead that's in the way, and you wonder why anyone put it there. And so that's a really, really cool course. It's not very expensive, and it's really fun.
Thank you. And maybe that's the last one. I see that people are dropping off because we went a little bit over time. But Jocelyn is asking you, can you please elaborate on the emergency scenario where the final decision, for example, to abandon the ship has to be made? Does this authority still rest with only one skipper? That's a good question.
That is a good question. I think, yes. Yes, I think that decision ultimately would rest with one person. If you had enough experience on board, so if I'm working with someone who is also equally experienced, you have you tend to have this kind of interchange in scenarios like that, where you almost feel like you don't need to say anything because it's obvious what you would then do. And I think, so yes, there is probably someone who would say, right, this is happening. And of course, if you had a huge argument, well, maybe one of you would be in the life raft and one of you wouldn't. But I do think that, if you try to level the dynamics within the team, a scenario like that doesn't feel so much like I tell you what to do and you follow. It's more we're all thinking actively at the scenario at the time about what to do, because we all have a hat on that is, I have a level of responsibility here, and the atmosphere is different because there isn't this one person saying what to do, and the problem with that one person expecting themselves to be the right person to say, let's get in the life raft at the time, is that in emergency scenarios, and anyone who has been in a very life-threatening scenario will know this, in emergency scenarios, people freeze. So I think you can ask police officers this in major situations. I think about 60 to 80% of people tend to freeze. So they become kind of useless. They turn into sort of following, they just have to follow, essentially. They can't think for themselves because of the adrenaline rush and stress and the fear and the anxiety. And you don't always know who that's going to be. And if that is the skipper, you need someone else on the boat who really understands what's going on and can take that charge. And also you need someone who would be able to notice if the person who is the skipper isn't quite making the right decision. I don't think there should be, a boat doesn't need to be a democracy in that you don't need to vote on everything, but it can be a collaboration of thinking.
Great. Well, thank you so much for all these answers. And just to let you know, Nikki, because I know you're not watching the chat at this point, since you're just sharing with you, then we have some very nice feedback. And Patrick, for instance, says that he thanks you for this eye-opener session, and he's excited to try new ways. So maybe he was in the maybe was, waiting to see if he would get out of his comfort zone. So thank you so much again for being here with us. Thank you everyone for watching. Don't forget, you'll get reminders for the next webinar that's on your screen right now. And just to let you know, you may have heard that Grand Large Yachting is also just launching a rally, around the world rally called the World Odyssey 500. It's left from La Grande Motte. It's going to be leaving. The official start is from Tenerife in a few days. And if you want to follow the real time adventures of other blue water sailors, don't miss following the adventure on our social networks at Glee World Odyssey. That'll be something to follow and give us some insights as to how other sailors are living this adventure as well for the 3 years that they're going to be going around the globe. So thank you again, everyone, for being here, and hopefully we'll see you online soon. And Nikki, will see you at the Outremer shipyard sometime soon again, I hope. Thank you so much for watching, and thank you for being
everyone.
here. Thank you. Bye-bye.